Before we begin, tell me quietly, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there? Right now. It is late. The fire is low. The room is cold. And your body has not truly been washed for a very long time. Not because you forgot, not because you were careless, but because, in this world, water is not comfort, it is risk. Your skin carries the weight of days, of labor, of smoke, of old cloth and old fear. This is not a story about filth. This is a story about survival, about routine, about what it meant to live inside a human body. In the medieval world, tonight, there will be no judgment, no modern answers, and no hurry. Only the quiet truth of medieval hygiene, as it was lived, night after night. It is early morning in the medieval countryside. A faint grey light filters through the rough shutters of a peasant's cottage. On a straw-filled pallet in the corner, a man stirs from sleep. The night's chill still clings to his humble dwelling, and as he awakens he feels the dampness of his own sweat cooled on his skin. He lies for a moment in the quiet, wrapped in a woolen blanket that smells of smoke and age. In the stillness, he becomes aware of his body's burdens, an itching on his ankle from a flea bite, the heaviness of grime on his limbs, the sour-sweet odour of yesterday's labour that lingers in the air. In the Middle Ages, to rise each day was to return to a body that could never be truly clean, a living vessel marked by sweat, dirt, and the inescapable earthiness of the world. He pushes aside the blanket and sits up, straw crackling beneath him. The rustling releases a faint, musty scent of old reeds and dust. Fine bits of straw cling to his linen under tunic and to the oily strands of his hair. He scratches gently at his scalp and neck, where dried perspiration has left a thin film overnight. A few flakes of shed skin and dirt dislodge as he rubs, tiny reminders of the layers that protect and plague him. In the dimness, he reaches for a wooden bucket of water drawn from the village well. The water is cool and tinged with yesterday's wood smoke. Little bits of ash swirl at the bottom. Nonetheless, it is precious. Scooping it in a rough clay cup, he pours a bit over his face and neck with a shiver. Droplets run in rivulets through the dirt on his skin. He splashes another cupful under each arm and even between his legs. A brief, bracing shock of cold in his most private creases. This simple ritual of topping and tailing, washing the face, armpits, and nether regions is performed at least once a day by nearly everyone, rich or poor. It is not a full bath, not even close, but it rinses away the night's sweat and whatever surface grime he can reach. He takes a coarse linen rag and scrubs at his body where he can, the cloth coming away dark with soil. In truth, it is a mere token of cleanliness. Much of the dirt clings on, a thin grime, in the pores of his skin, embedded under his fingernails, caught in the lines of his hands, and the texture of his unshaven face. The medieval body awakens not to freshness, but to continuity. Yesterday's sweat becomes today's stale odour. Yesterday's dust becomes the base upon which new dust will settle. As the man washes, he can already feel perspiration starting anew on his back. The effort of hauling water and the proximity to the hearth have warmed him. The cottage is small and air is still. A tendril of smoke from last night's fire lingers, its woody aroma blending with the human scent of the space. A mixture of bodies, old cooking spills, and the ever-present dirt floor. He and his family swept the earthen floor, but one can never truly banish the earth from a home made of earth itself. Dust hangs in the slanted light, and as he moves, he kicks up a little more. He dries his damp face with a sleeve. The sleeve is part of the linen shirt he slept in, the inner layer of clothing that absorbs sweat and oils from his skin. The fabric was once undyed off-white, though now it carries the grey-brown cast of long use. He owns 2 such shirts, if he's lucky, one to wear while the other is washed. The one he wears now was laundered not too many days ago, yet it already bears the map of his body, yellowed under the arms, stained at the collar where neck meets cloth, smudged with traces of labour. Linen is prized for how it soaks up sweat and softens with time. But in absorbing the stinky dirt the body produces, it becomes saturated with that dirt until washed again. He sniffs as he pulls the shirt over his head. A faint ammoniac tang of old sweat, mixed with smoke, greets his nose. But to him, it is simply the smell of life. Everyone and everything smells of smoke, sweat, or both. It is said the cleanest person in these times would still smell of these things to us today. But here, now, it is unremarkable. He dresses in the semi-dark, piece by piece. Over his linen undershirt goes a tunic of wool, scuffed and weather-faded. The woolen over-tunic has rarely been washed. Wool is thick and slow to dry, so washing a garment of it is a great labour reserved for necessity. Instead, he keeps it clean by airing and brushing. Each evening he shakes off the dust and hangs it by the hearth, or even outside by moonlight, believing the night air might freshen it. Often the tunic carries a smoky perfume from the fire, the acrid cure that chases away fleas and dampness alike. This morning, as he fastens the simple belt around his tunic, he notices the fabric is still a bit stiff in places. Dried sweat has left it starch-like under the arms and at the small of his back, where it pressed against his skin during yesterday's exertions. He doesn't bother to try to wash those salt lines out. A new day's work will soon moisten and soften them again. Pulling on his woolen hose, stockings, and cracked leather shoes, he rises to his feet. A faint cloud of dust shakes from his clothes as he pats them down. The day's attire is set, layers of linen and wool that will bear the brunt of his body's excretions, the sweat, oils and filth that seep from living flesh. In wearing these layers, he carries his own micro-environment with him, a mixture of cloth and body, seldom fully cleaned, ever exchanging odours and moisture. Stepping outside, he greets the morning air. It is cool and laced with the smell of dew on soil. For a moment, he relishes the gentle breeze on his face, the pure scent of wet grass and distant wood smoke. Compared to the stuffy cottage, dawn smells clean. A rooster crows and he hears the shuffle of animals in their pen. Already, there is work to be done. He walks across the yard, feeling the ground through the thin soles of his shoes. In a corner, his wife is drawing water from their well, her arms flexing as she lifts the heavy bucket. She has been up before him, tending to their little home. He nods to her and takes the bucket, carrying it to a trough to water their mule. The trough is made of old wood. Its rim is slimy to the touch with algae. He remembers how, in years past, when water was scarcer, he himself might have wiped his body with a rag at this very trough, using the same water the animals drank. Such was a common morning wash for poor folk, a simple wipe down at a horse trough or communal fountain. Today, at least, they have enough water in their household bucket for washing, so the trough is left for the beasts. Still, water is never wasted. What remains from the morning wash basin will later be used to rinse tools or thrown on the dirt floor to keep dust down. He heads to the small barn to check on their cow and goats. The warm smell of manure and animal sweat envelops him as he opens the wooden door. The animals stir in their pens, their bodies radiating a feral heat. He pats the cow and feels the slickness of its hide where dung has smeared. In truth, the whole world around him is soiled in one way or another, by dust, by dung, by decay. He forks some fresh straw bedding for the cow, knowing that by nightfall it will all be dirty again. In this era, cleanliness is a momentary state, a brief victory over an onslaught of filth that continually returns. As he milks the goat, a trickle of sweat forms under his cap. The effort of carrying feed and pails has begun to warm his body. A droplet slides down his temple. He wipes it with the back of his hand, leaving a faint streak of mud across his cheek from earlier chores. He hardly notices. A bit of earth on the skin is as ordinary as sunlight on grass. With the animals tended, the man takes up his hoe and heads to the fields. The sun has cleared the horizon now, golden light spilling over patches of mist. As he walks the narrow path, his body awakens fully. He feels the slight ache in his shoulders from yesterday's toil and the stiffness in his legs. These physical pains are normal companions, as much a part of him as the calluses on his palms. He squeezes his hand around the wooden hoe handle, the thick pads of skin on his fingers pressing firm. Those calluses are lined with ingrained dirt that no amount of washing seems to remove, the permanent signature of manual labor. Many medieval laborers bear such embedded grime, etched into the creases of their knuckles and the walls of their fingertips. It is said that even a laborer's handshake carried the feel of the soil. Such dirt was stubborn. Only time or a long soak could draw it out. And time for soaking is a luxury he does not have. By mid-morning, the man is hard at work, turning soil in the fields. The rising sun quickly banishes the last traces of dawn's cool. Under its gaze, sweat beads on his skin. Perspiration was known in theory as one of the body's natural ways to expel excess, a necessary purge for health. In practice, it is simply an inescapable reality under the sun. He grunts as he lifts his hoe and drives it into the earth. Each swing coaxes more sweat from his pores. At first it dampens the cloth at his armpits and lower back. Before long, dark patches spread on his linen shirt, sticking it to his skin. The salty moisture stings slightly, where he has any small cuts, or where yesterday's sweat has irritated the skin. He pauses, back bent, and wipes his brow with his forearm. The motion leaves a muddy smear on his forehead, the dust of the field now mixing with the sweat on his body. With every movement he makes, the environment and his body merge a little more, the soil of the ground now clinging to the hollows of his throat, the grit of sand now embedded in the hair on his arms. Soon the man's whole body glistens with effort. Rivulets of sweat trace paths through the dust on his face, carving clean lines in the dirt before new dust settles again. Tiny gnats buzz around, attracted to the moisture. He can feel one crawling at the nape of his neck, where the collar of his tunic is damp. He reaches back and idly scratches there, fingers meeting a familiar waxy layer of grime. It's the kind of persistent grime that accumulates when one hasn't bathed properly in many days. The kind that no quick morning rinse can dislodge. He carries on working, rhythmically lifting and driving the hoe. The physical exertion is intense, but he is used to it. His body, though dirty and weary, is strong. Each time he exhales, he catches a faint whiff of his own odor, especially as he turns, causing a draft up his tunic. It is the smell of a man who has sweated in the same clothes for several days. It is not a single smell, but layers of smell. The sharp tang of fresh sweat, the sour note of old dried sweat from yesterday, a yeasty hint from the leather of his shoes mixed with foot sweat, and underlying it all a general musk of unwashed human skin. Medieval people are aware of body odor. They do not have the means to prevent it entirely, but they recognize when sweat stinks beyond measure, as one 12th century writer observed. If he were a wealthy townswoman, he might follow the advice of such writers by wiping his underarms with a linen soaked in boiled wine and herbs to cut the smell. But he is a simple farmer. Expensive herbs, wine for washing, those are beyond his reach. Instead, he relies on more humble aids. Inside his tunic, he carries a small pouch of dried herbs tucked by his chest. Today, it's rosemary and a bit of wormwood gathered last autumn. The fragrant oils of rosemary are said to repel lice, and the smell masks some of his odor. As he sweats, the little herb sachet releases its scent, a green, medicinal sweetness intermingling with the rankness of his sweat. It is a small comfort. Herbal lore has taught him and his wife which plants might help. Lavender to ward off fleas, wormwood and tansy to discourage lice, mint to freshen the air. He cannot stop sweating. That is as impossible as halting the sun's rise. But he can try to keep the consequences at bay. The pests are among those consequences. The warmth and moisture of his body inevitably attract them. Even now, as he works, he occasionally feels a tickle on his scalp or in his shirt, a louse disturbed by the heat perhaps, or a flea hopping from the grass. Head lice and fleas are simple facts of life, mentioned in no chronicle because they are as common as the dust and as ubiquitous as the household cat. Every so often, he runs his fingers through his hair and catches a tiny louse between his nails. He flicks it away. Medieval texts describe lice as being born from the dirt in one's pores and the warmth of one's clothing folds. And indeed it feels that way, as if the very sweat and grime of his unwashed skin spontaneously generate these small tormentors. Looking at the worms with feet, crawling on a dirty tunic, one can understand why they believed filth itself bred the parasites. The man merely sighs and scratches, knowing that only a thorough washing of his body and boiling of his clothes could truly rid him of these companions, and those are rarities. By noon the sun is high and merciless. The man's throat is parched and his skin blazes with heat. He pauses in the shade of a hedgerow to drink from a leather flask of water his wife sent with him. The water is lukewarm and tastes of the leather and a hint of algae. It came from the rain barrel near their home. Still, it refreshes him. He splashes a little on his face and rubs his eyes. The grit of sweat salt had collected in the creases beside his nose. Now he dissolves it with water. For a brief moment, he contemplates stepping to the little stream at the field's edge. How good it would feel to wade in up to his waist and cool his body, to let the water carry off the sweat and dust. In summer, some labourers do just that, dunking themselves in river or pond when the heat is too much. A quick plunge can wash off the obvious dirt and sweat. But it is midday, and he has much work yet. He contents himself with wetting his hair and the back of his neck from the flask. The drips run down beneath his shirt, tracing his spine. As he moves back into the sun, the water evaporates quickly, a fleeting relief. If it were a holy day or fair day, perhaps he would stop work entirely and take time to bathe. Bathing, after all, is not completely unknown to him. In a nearby town, there is a communal bathhouse, a place he has visited only once or twice in his life, on special occasions. He remembers it dimly. A wooden tub large enough to sit in, steam rising from heated water, the shock of sinking into true warmth. In that bathhouse visit long ago, he scrubbed layers of dirt from himself that he didn't even realize were there. He recalls how the water turned brown and opaque as he washed, as if years of filth were melting off at once. And he remembers the rare sensation of emerging truly clean, his skin pink from scrubbing and hot water, his hair combed and rinsed. Such luxury is a rarity. For most ordinary folk, a full immersion bath might happen a few times a year at best, perhaps before a great festival like Easter or Christmas, or when grime truly becomes unbearable. Heating so much water is costly and laborious. Firewood is dear, and the time needed to boil one tubful is time stolen from other chores. So the common peasant reserves bathing for the rarest days, learning instead to endure the feeling of being perpetually a little dirty. He presses on with his fieldwork through the afternoon. The dirt beneath his fingernails grows thicker as he pulls weeds by hand. His sweat has long since soaked through all layers. Perspiration even darkens his sturdy woolen tunic now, leaving it blotched and heavy. With each step and stretch, he feels his damp shirt chafe against his skin. In places where cloth folds against flesh, under his arms, behind his knees, around his groin, the constant presence of moisture and grit causes a red irritation. He shifts his belt and readjusts the cloth, knowing from experience that later he may find small rashes or even sores where the combination of sweat, dirt, and friction has worn at his skin. Such minor afflictions are common. The medieval body often suffers these little indignities. Heat, rash, chafed thighs, inflamed hair follicles. Without modern ointments, the best one can do is wash the area and apply a soothing herb if available. The man makes a mental note to ask his wife for a bit of chamomile or marigold salve tonight for the raw patch he feels on his thigh, if she has any. Herbal remedies are their medicine. Chamomile for skin, sage for swelling, and so on. But prevention would be better. And prevention in this case would mean keeping that skin dry and clean. A near impossibility on a day like this. Eventually, the sun begins to sink, and the day's work comes to an end. The man's body is exhausted. Every muscle is sore, and his skin feels coated in a thick layer of the day's toil. Dust and sweat have dried into a visible grime, giving his exposed arms a greyish tinge. When he scratches his forearm, his nails come away with black dirt, the mixture of soil, dead skin, and sweat that has caked on him. His face is gritty. When he blinks, he can feel grit at the corners of his eyes. A smear of dried mud from the fields streaks one of his cheeks, and his hair is plastered to his scalp in sweaty locks. He looks, in short, like a man who has literally been rolling in the earth, though he has only been working upon it. In this state he heads home, walking slowly with hoe over shoulder. There is no embarrassment in his appearance. Any neighbour passing by would be in a similar condition after the day's labour. Still, as he nears his home, he anticipates the small reliefs of the evening. A splash of water on his face, a chance to sit and rinse the dirt from his cracked hands, a simple meal to fill his stomach. These are the humble consolations for the problem of the body's filth, a routine to tame it each night, knowing it will return by morning. Back at the cottage, the man's wife is already busy with supper. A stew simmers in a pot over the hearth, filling the room with the aroma of lentils, onions, and garlic. She too bears the marks of a hard day, strands of hair escaping her kerchief, clinging to the sweat on her neck, soot smudged on her arms from tending the fire, and a long apron that bears traces of dough, ash, and spilled broth. She glances up and offers a tired smile as he enters, then wrinkles her nose playfully, noting the obvious truth. He stinks. He grins wryly. Both of them smell of work and life. What else is new? But before anything, cleaning up must be done. Even in a poor home, it is expected that one will wash off the worst of the dirt before eating. The man takes up a basin, a wide, shallow metal bowl, and his wife pours some water from the bucket into it. The water is no longer fresh drawn. It's been sitting and has gone tepid. No matter, it will do. He rolls up his sleeves and plunges his hands in. Rubbing vigorously, he watches the clear water turn cloudy brown as dirt unwinds from his skin. The particles float for a moment before sinking to the bottom of the basin in swirls. He scrubs around his fingernails with a small sliver of wood ash soap, working up what little lather he can. Under his nails are crescents of black soil, and it takes some effort with a knife tip to remove them. He then splashes his face, neck, and chest, wiping away the day's grime with a rag. His wife does the same for her hands and arms, scrubbing the soot and flour from her fingers. Almost every household, even a peasant's, owns a basin and jug for such daily washing. They are as essential as the cooking pot. Indeed, etiquette and health guides alike advise washing hands and face each morning and before meals, a practice the couple follows out of simple common sense. Clean hands will keep dirt out of their food. A rinsed face and beard keep the soup from tasting of sweat. In their humble way, they are heeding the same principles that the noble lords do, just without the finery. As they sit down to eat, the couple is mindful of small manners passed down through generations. Medieval people know that food and filth should not mix. They will not put a dirty hand back into the communal stew pot, nor wipe their noses at the table. Such rules are not only courtesy, but survival. Illness lurks where hygiene fails. Tonight, the two of them share a wooden bowl of stew, sopping it with coarse bread. The warmth of the meal revives them. The fire crackles, casting a flickering glow on the rough plaster walls. Within that golden light, the man's face shines with sweat again. The heat of the hearth has drawn it out. Grease from the stew glistens on his chin until he wipes it with the back of his hand. Though they have cleaned up, they are never entirely clean. A sheen of perspiration is already forming anew on their skin from the hot food and fire, but they pay it no mind. This is their hour of rest and small joys. A full belly, a moment of peace, the familiar comfort of home. The sense of dinner, savoury and rich, mingle with the ever-present smells of human habitation. The smoke from the fire, sharp and tarry, the sweat from their bodies' rep, but diluted by the earlier wash, and the musty odour of the rushes strewn on the floor. To freshen the air, The wife has thrown a handful of dried thyme on the hearth. As it singes, it releases a pleasant herbal fragrance that momentarily masks the more acrid odors of life. They eat slowly, by and by breaking their silence with a few soft words about the day. Fatigue weighs on their voices. The man's eyelids are heavy, but there is one more duty he owes his body before sleep. After supper, the light outside has faded to dusk. Inside the cottage, the hearth provides the only glow. The man takes a seat by the fire on a low stool, and his wife comes to stand behind him. Gently, she takes a bone comb from a shelf. By feel and habit, she begins to draw it through his hair. First, the wide-toothed side, to detangle the sweat-matted locks, and then the fine-toothed side, to capture the unwelcome guests. The comb's teeth glide through his hair and scrape along his scalp, a sensation both soothing and slightly painful where it catches. Combing is a nightly ritual for many. It removes dirt and spread oils through the hair, while snagging lice and nits. By the firelight, the wife pauses whenever she sees a tiny pale shape wriggling in the comb's teeth. One by one, she picks them out, lice, some adult, and some eggs, and crushes them between her fingernails. The man closes his eyes, grateful for this attention. It is almost meditative, this grooming, akin to the way primates might pick at each other's fur in companionship. In many homes, family members spend these twilight minutes helping delude one another, sharing quiet conversation as they reduce the day's itching. Here, the only sound is the comb's rasp and the occasional pop from the fire. Once finished with his hair, she checks the back of his neck and behind his ears for any red bites or lingering insects. Satisfied, she gives his shoulder a pat. Now it is her turn. The man takes up the comb and, though his work-roughened hands are clumsy, he tries his best to repeat the process for her. He gently lifts her long hair, which she has unbraided, and combs through the dark strands slowly. The comb catches on a tangle near the end, a bit of straw perhaps from the bedding, or a knot formed while she cooked. He works it free and continues, section by section. He knows the spots she usually complains of itching, along the nape, and sometimes in the seams of her bodice. Tonight he finds 2 lice and dispatches them. They will not get them all. By tomorrow, new lice may crawl from the folds of their clothing, or hatch from unseen eggs. It is a cycle seemingly without end. Each day's sweat and dirt inviting each day's parasites. A torment and a routine all at once. But at least for this night, they have done what they can to lessen the irritations of the body. With the delousing done, the couple tends to their sleeping arrangements. In wealthier homes, one might have clean linen sheets, and even take pride in sleeping nude between freshly washed linens to keep the body clean. In this cottage, linens are few and precious. They do have an old sheet. Patches of it are threadbare, which they shook out earlier in the day. It still carries faint stains from long use that no amount of boiling could entirely bleach. The wife had aired it in the sun last week, letting the wind blow through it, and sprinkled it with lavender water for a fresher scent. Tonight, as she lays it over the straw-filled mattress tick, it gives off a subtle fragrance amidst the prevailing smell of straw. The man removes his outer tunic and hangs it on a wooden peg near the hearth. By morning it will be dry from today's sweat, and the smoky air may further deodorize it. He strips off his damp linen undershirt as well. It is clammy and uncomfortable from the day. His skin, exposed to the open air, feels both sticky and chilled. The thin layer of grime over his torso and limbs tightens as it dries, giving an overall sense of tautness. He quickly pulls on a looser, dry linen shirt, one of his spares kept for sleep, cleaner than his work shirt. His wife does similarly, exchanging her sweat-soaked gown for a simple loose shift. They have washed their feet in the remaining water from the basin, a small luxury for comfort. The day's final light glints on the murky brown-grey washwater as the wife throws it out the door. A whole film of dirt has settled at the bottom of the bowl, the discarded detritus of their bodies. Looking at it, one can see concretely the problem of the body, that each day it sheds waste and dirt, in quantities both visible and invisible. Every bit of that grime in the water was clinging to their skin just moments ago, and no doubt much still remains on them even after wiping down. They will never go to bed perfectly clean, but they have lessened the day's burden. At last, they retire to bed. The man eases himself onto the straw mattress with a groan of relief. His wife lies beside him. The straw shifts and crackles beneath their weight, releasing a faint grassy scent mixed with the lingering odor of old perspiration from nights past. The blanket drawn over them has absorbed years of smoke and sweat as well. It is heavy, woolen, and a bit scratchy against any bare skin. He can feel an itch on his leg where a flea jumps and bites. Idly he rubs his foot over the spot, crushing the tiny offender against his calf. A soft sigh escapes him as his body relaxes for the first time all day. In the darkness, the problems of the body are least visible but most acutely felt. He notices the sting of that rash on his thigh, the dull throb of a blister on his palm, the general film of uncleanliness that he has grown used to but not completely oblivious of. Sometimes, in the privacy of night, he allows himself to feel a kind of wistfulness, a dim memory of what it was like to be truly clean, perhaps as a child splashing in a summer pond, or that one long-ago bathhouse visit. In the silence, he can almost recall the sensation of warm water enveloping him, of layers of dirt sloughing off and leaving skin new and tender. It was a fleeting heaven. How light the body felt afterward. How the skin nearly tingled with sensitivity after being freed from weeks of grime. Lying here now, coated in the patina of sweat and toil, he remembers that lightness as one remembers a pleasant dream. A small part of him yearns for it, but he knows such indulgence comes rarely. Most nights he will sleep with the itch, with the ache, with the film of sweat drying cold on his back, and it will bother him less than the cares of tomorrow's work. Such is life. In their bed, the couple says their quiet prayers. Though they do not articulate it, there is perhaps gratitude that they have made it through another day in bodies that, for all their discomforts, still function and serve. Their world holds an understanding. The body is both a gift and a burden. Medieval people sometimes speak of the body as a vessel for the soul, a vessel that must be tended, but also one that can lead one into temptation or pain. Some extremely pious individuals even chose to forsake bodily comfort entirely, eschewing baths and embracing filth as a form of penance. There are tales of holy men and women who wore dirty hair shirts, teeming with vermin, believing that suffering the itch of lice brought them closer to God. Such extremes are not the norm, but they are a reminder. In this age, many view enduring the body's trials as part of life's spiritual journey. For this peasant and his wife, however, the body is not something to mortify on purpose. It is simply their instrument of survival, and thus must be cared for as best they can. They have done what modest washing and grooming is possible. Now they yield to rest. In the quiet darkness, the little house settles. The fire has died down to embers, and a thin wisp of smoke curls in the air, the scent of wood smoke ever present even as they sleep. The man drifts into slumber with the heaviness of fatigue weighing on his limbs. Beside him, his wife is already breathing deeply, the loosened strands of her hair resting across the pillow. The night is cool. Gradually their sweat evaporates, and their skin cools with it. In sleep, they unconsciously draw closer for warmth. Skin touches skin, and if one were awake to notice, one might feel the slight clamminess still there, the traces of salt at the hairline, or the roughness of calloused fingers. But in sleep, those sensations fade from awareness. A dog barks in the distance, and an owl hoots from the barn rafters. The smells, the textures, the discomforts of the day slowly blur into the background of their dreams. Thus the medieval body finds a brief respite, but even in rest it continues its quiet labours. Sweat still forms lightly in the night. Oils continue to seep from pores. The stomach gurgles in digestion. Perhaps a louse creeps from hair to bedding. Come morning, there will be new sweat, new dirt, new tasks to clean again. Time and time again, the cycle repeats. For there is no permanent escape from the body's soil and sweat in this era. No running water to whisk it away daily. No miracle product to block the odour. Only the slow, patient maintenance of washing when one can, and enduring when one cannot. And yet, within this reality, people find a rhythm. The dirt and discomfort, layered on skin and embedded in fabric, become as familiar as the weather and the turning of seasons. The body may be a problem, but it is also the tool with which they live, love, and labour. They learn to live inside it, to navigate the line between purity and filth as best they can. In the darkness before the dawn, the man unconsciously scratches at a faint itch on his chest, then settles. His wife murmurs and shifts. Outside, the first hints of morning birdsong begin. Soon, the grey light will return, and with it, the unending, humble battle to scrub away the dirt that life paints on them. But for now, in these last moments of night, the medieval couple sleeps on, wrapped in the honest smells of sweat and smoke, bodies at peace for a little while, oblivious to the grime that daylight will show, and dreaming perhaps of nothing at all. They rest in the only bodies they have ever known, bodies that are never truly clean, yet carry on faithfully, day after day, under the indifferent sky. When morning comes, they will awaken and begin again the slow, careful dance with dirt and cleanliness. They will splash their faces with cold water, wipe away the nightly residues of sweat and sleep from their skin, and step forward into another day. The cycle is ordinary and endless. The medieval body toils, sweats, is sullied by the world, and then makes its modest return toward cleanliness, only to face the next day's soil anew. In this steady rhythm, time indeed feels almost irrelevant. There is no final victory to be had over the body's impurities, only the grace of temporary reprieve. And so, life flows on in its earthy, sensory fullness. The skin remains a little oily, the sweat never entirely vanished, the dirt ever ready to settle again. Yet within this reality, people continue to plough fields, bake bread, pray, laugh, and find contentment. They accept that to be human in their age is to wear a thin coat of earth upon one's flesh, to smell of labour and the hearth, to feel at all times the weight of one's corporeal existence. The body is a problem, yes, but it is also home. In that enduring acceptance lies a quiet, stoic beauty, a oneness with the world that clings to their very skin, an intimate understanding that body and earth are never fully separate. This is what it meant to live inside a medieval body that could not be easily cleaned, a life where flesh, sweat, dirt, and soul all intermingled in an unhurried, perpetual dance, day after day, under sun and stars, in the gentle, unending flow of time. A still darkness hangs over the medieval town's outskirts, broken only by the distant murmur of a river. In the moonlight, that river winds like a black ribbon, a source of life. Yet at this late hour, it seems almost malevolent, for in these times, water is both giver and taker. A lone villager standing at the bank feels the night air heavy with mist. She hears the soft lap of water on stone and shivers, not just from the chill. In her heart lives a quiet dread inherited over generations. The knowledge that water, so essential and pure in Scripture, can also invite danger and sin. The cold breath of the river carries whispers of stories, of those who wandered too close to its edge and never returned, of fevers that followed a chill bathing, of souls tempted in the steamy haze of bathhouses. In the distance, church bells toll midnight, and she tightens her shawl, choosing the safety of her dim hut over the enigmatic allure of the dark stream. In the medieval imagination, water holds a fearful power, an element to approach with reverence and wariness in equal measure. By dawn's first light, the streets awaken and the mood shifts. In the towns and hamlets, people draw water from wells and fountains for daily needs. Yet even in daylight, a basin of water can inspire unease. A mother pours water into a wooden bowl to wash her infant, reciting a prayer as protection against the morning cold. She knows what the local healer cautioned. A baby's bath could be a peril if the water is too cold or the fire too low. Immersing the fragile child might invite a chill or worse, a visit from death in the form of a lung fever. So she dips merely a cloth, dabbing the child's face and tiny hands, unwilling to risk a full plunge. This scene repeats in countless homes, partial washes, a bit of warmed water from the hearth, nothing that could shock the body. Everyone understands that full bathing is a rare and formidable act. It is whispered that the shock of cold water on warm flesh can open the pores and let illness creep inside. Not even the village doctor can fully explain it. But many have seen a seemingly healthy neighbour take ill after a bath and been quick to draw the connection. Better to be prudent and stay a little grimy than to invite a deadly sickness through one's open skin. After all, hygiene in these days is a careful balance. A daily wipe of the hands and face, a regular change of linen undergarments, but seldom the luxury of soaking the entire body. Too much water, especially heated water, carries unseen risks in the medieval mind. Even as people feared the perils of water, they could not ignore its spiritual significance. In church on Sundays, they heard how water can be holy, the instrument of baptism and purification of the soul. Yet the same sermons might warn of the sins that lurk in bathhouses, where bodies are exposed and morals tested. The Church encouraged cleanliness of the spirit, and even the body, but only in proper measure. To strip off one's clothes and bathe among others was to strip away modesty, inviting impure thoughts. Nakedness was a vulnerability, physical and moral. A bather is unclothed not only before fellow men and women, but under the eyes of God. Medieval artwork and literature often equated outer impurity with inner sin. Washing could be virtuous, but wanton bathing for pleasure teetered on the edge of vanity or lust. In modest communities, a man who bathed alone at a quiet bend in the river might still feel the burn of shame on his cheeks, as if committing a private indulgence. A woman, even in the privacy of her own cottage, might only bathe by candlelight with shutters barred, mindful of Eve's disgrace in uncovering herself. Chastity and humility counselled against luxuriating in baths. Indeed, some devout souls boasted of rarely bathing at all, a badge of piety earned through enduring dirt. It is said Queen Isabella of Castile took pride in having bathed only twice in her entire life, once at birth, and once on her wedding day, considering it proof of her virtuous restraint. Such an extreme was whispered about with awe. To eschew baths was to deny the flesh's comfort for the sake of the soul. And while Isabella's austerity was unusual, it highlights a real sentiment, asterisk to many. Frequent bathing was an indulgence of the flesh, something to be suspicious of, if not outright avoided. Cleanliness was next to godliness, yes, but there was a line where cleanliness became luxury. Better to live with the earth clinging to your skin than to risk sin by revelling too freely in warm water. In the public bathhouses that dotted medieval cities, this tension between desire and fear played out in vivid detail. Imagine a bustling bathhouse on a Saturday afternoon. Steam hazing the air, water sloshing in wooden tubs, and voices, echoes of laughter, gossip, the splash of limbs in water. Here, for a few coins, anyone from a hard-working cooper to a wealthy merchant might seek the comfort of a hot soak. Yet even in this camaraderie, unease coiled beneath the mirth. Men and women soaked in separate rooms or at designated hours by strict law of town and guild. The penalty for a man sneaking into the women's side, or vice versa, was severe and swift. Bathhouse keepers were required to enforce decency. No mixed bathing of the sexes unless properly screened. No improper conduct. A thin linen sheet might be hung to partition tubs, and bathers often kept linen caps, or even a thin shift on, absurd as it might seem, to preserve a token of modesty. Still, temptation was said to lurk in the warm, dimly lit chambers. By candlelight, as attendants poured aromatic water over shoulders and scrubbed backs with scented soap, one's thoughts might wander. It was an open secret that prostitutes frequented some bathhouses to ply their trade among the cubicles of steam. Pious preachers railed against these establishments as dens of iniquity, where the devil might hide behind the aroma of rosemary and clove in the water. A respectable townsperson had to wonder, would merely walking into such a place stain one's reputation, or even one's soul? The bathhouse, for all its merriment, was also a place of profound vulnerability. A bather left at the door not only their clothes but their defences. In the tub, unarmed and unclothed, a person was as exposed as at birth. There are tales of crimes committed in these wet chambers, rare, but horrifying enough to be remembered. It was said in one northern kingdom that a thief who stole even a trifling coin from a bather would be condemned to hang. So abhorrent was the idea of violating someone in that naked state, whether this was written law or simply folk rumour. It conveys the shared feeling that to attack a bather was a heinous offence, an exploitation of a moment of trust, when a person set aside the armour of daily life. Even without thieves or assailants, the bather was vulnerable to the water itself. A wooden tub could become a drowning trap if one slipped under in a faint, or if overcome by the heat. Many bathhouses employed attendants not just to serve, but to keep watch that no patron succumbed in the bath, especially if wine and merriment were involved, as they often were among the wealthy who dined and drank in the tub. The line between pleasure and peril was thin. A too hot bath could cause a swoon. A too cold dunk could stop the breath. Patrons knew this in their bones. So a curious tension filled the bathhouse. Laughter and relaxation, edged with the primal awareness of hovering danger. In quieter moments, when the musicians paused and the chatter lulled, one could hear the drip of water echo against stone and wood. In that drip, some heard the water's warning voice. Be careful, I am not tame. In times of plague and pestilence, the fear of water intensified into near panic. As the Black Death swept through cities and countryside in the mid-14th century, claiming half of all lives in some places, people looked for any cause or carrier of the curse. The public baths, once a source of conviviality and relief, came under dark suspicion. Could the baths be spreading the sickness? It seemed plausible. So many bodies together in the warmth, breathing the same steamy air. And indeed, when plague raged, the baths fell silent. Anxious citizens stayed away, leaving the great bath halls empty of all but ghostly wisps of steam curling around unused tubs. Desperate to avoid the plague's touch, men and women shunned not only the bathhouse, but any communal gathering. One famed scholar of the age, Erasmus of Rotterdam, would later write of those times. 25 years ago, nothing was more fashionable than the public baths. Today, there are none. The new plague has taught us to avoid them. It was a stark transformation, from a bathing society to one that feared water and closeness. Those who lived through those years learned to bathe quickly and in isolation, if at all. They scrubbed their clothes rather than their skin, hoping that clean garments might suffice to ward off disease. Medical theory of the day reinforced this caution. Learned doctors cautioned that hot water opened the body's pores, making one porous, literally and figuratively, to the foul miasmas of disease. A body heated in a bath, they said, was like a castle with its gates unbarred. Infection could slip in with ease. So the prudent stopped heating large tubs of water. If they must wash, they did so in cold or tepid water, briskly and without indulgence. Better to feel the sting of cool water and quickly dry off than to linger in a luxurious hot soak that might invite the plague inside. In this way, fear conquered comfort. The very image of a steaming bath, once inviting, became ominous in the plague years. Water, the gentle cleanser, was now seen as a possible conspirator of death. Beyond the towns, out in the rural expanses, people had always been wary of natural waters. A farmer finishing a day's labour might long to rinse the sweat and dirt from his skin in the nearby river, especially in the heat of summer. Perhaps at twilight he approaches the river bank. The water flows cool and clear over the rocks, and the promise of refreshment is strong. He steps in, feeling the mud squeeze between his toes, and for a moment enjoys the relief. But he does not dare wade in too deep. In every village, there are stories of someone who went for a swim and never returned. The calmest-looking river can hide treacherous currents beneath its surface. A crumbling bank of earth can give way underfoot. How many mothers have scolded their children to stay away from the mill pond, recounting the fate of a playmate who slipped under and drowned. The records of coroners and chroniclers quietly attest that drowning was an all too common end for the unwary. The cold water can paralyze with shock, a sudden gasp, a failure of muscles, and then silence beneath the ripples. Medieval folk might not know the clinical details of hypothermia, but they understand in a visceral way that cold water kills. Even in mild weather, a deep lake or fast river is as cold as midwinter a few feet down. A robust young man jumping in for a dare could be struck by the cold like an arrow to the heart, his lungs seizing as the frigid embrace overwhelms him. So there is always a tension. The river calls with its promise of cleanliness and coolness, but the villager respects its power with superstitious fear. In the fading light, the farmer splashes his arms and face, wipes the grime from his neck, but stops short of full immersion. He imagines, perhaps, pale arms under the water's surface, the spirits of those claimed by the depths, waiting to pull another soul down. With a shudder, he retreats back to land, water streaming from his elbows. Clean, up to a point, refreshed, but not reckless. In the gathering dusk, the river's surface reflects the purple sky, innocent and dangerous all at once. For many, water in the wild also carried the taint of impurity. On the edges of towns, rivers served as sewers and dumping grounds. Tanners washed hides upstream. Dye makers emptied their cauldrons, latrines and runoff drained into the currents. A traveller reaching a city by road often smelled the river before he saw it. The idea of bathing in such foul water turned the stomach. In some places, bathing in the town river might leave one dirtier and certainly smellier than before. The grime of civilization flowed with every brook and stream near human settlement. Thus, if one desired a true cleansing, it often meant a pilgrimage of sorts to cleaner waters. A remote woodland pool, a spring-fed lake away from habitation. But those places, pristine as they were, inspired their own fears. A crystal-clear spring in a forest could be the haunt of otherworldly beings, the domain of fairies or water spirits best left undisturbed. And even if one scoffed at such tales, the very isolation of a wild pool meant no help would come if something went wrong. The bather would be alone with the elements. A slip on mossy rock, a sudden cramp, it could mean death with none to hear your cries. So the common man or woman stayed cautious. Water was to drink, to cook with, to sprinkle in small amounts for washing. But to submerge oneself completely was an exceptional act requiring courage or desperation. Within the candle-lit confines of their homes, medieval people found ways to stay reasonably clean without courting the dangers of big baths. A typical evening might see a family gathered around the hearth, the firelight dancing on wooden walls blackened by years of soot. On a stool in the corner sits a humble basin of water drawn from the well. The father, hands calloused from the day's work, washes his face and hands, scrubbing with a coarse cloth. The mother combs out her hair and perhaps uses a few drops of lavender water to freshen it. Children rinse dusty feet before bed. These routines are small, ritualistic, and safe. Full bathing, the kind where one might sit in a large tub of warm water, is reserved for rare occasions. It might happen for a feast day, or if one is recovering from illness and the physician prescribes it, or simply when the accumulation of grime makes the body itch for relief. But even then, it is done carefully. The wooden tub is brought into the kitchen, near the warmth of the fire. Buckets of water are heated painstakingly, one by one, over flames that lick the iron pots. It is laborious and costly. Each log burned for a bath is a log not warming the house or cooking the soup. The household might save up fuel for weeks to afford this luxury of a bath. And when finally the tub is filled, more lukewarm than truly hot, the bather enters it with a mix of relief and trepidation. The warmth is a gentle bliss, unknotting muscle and loosening the caked dirt on skin. Often herbs are tossed in, thyme or chamomile, rosemary or mint, both to scent the water and to fortify the bather's health, for these herbs are believed to guard against chills and evil vapours. As the bather leans back, eyes closed, they feel for a moment utterly at peace. Yet, the mind can't help but wander to what might follow. They know they must not linger too long. A too lengthy bath might enfeeble the body. Physicians say it can weaken the sinews or disturb the balance of the humours, leaving one weak as a newborn after stepping out. So after scrubbing and rinsing, out they come, wrapped in a linen sheet by the hearth. Steam rises from reddened skin in the cool air. There is pleasure and gratefulness, but also a hint of guilt, perhaps. Such comfort is rare and maybe undeserved. A bath is something to sigh over, to relish briefly, and to atone for in a way, by quickly getting back into one's coarse woolen clothes and resuming the humble routines of life. Comfort is fleeting. Toil and dirt are constant companions, and somehow reassuring in their familiarity. What then is the psychology of a people who seldom, if ever, feel completely clean? One might think they grew accustomed to filth and hated it, but the truth was more complex. Medieval folk took what hygiene they could seriously. Washing face and hands each morning and before meals was expected of anyone with manners. They laundered their undergarments regularly, understanding that clean linen next to the skin kept bad odours and ailments at bay. In this, they found a measure of control. But regarding the entire body, an underlying wariness persisted, a sense that the body's interior and exterior must not be rendered too naked or too open to the world. Being fully clean meant being, however briefly, exposed and unguarded. Some people likely never experienced the sensation of total immersion in water, to float free of gravity, weightless and naked. For those who did, it might have felt strangely transformative, even unsettling. Imagine a labourer who, on one rare holiday, finds himself in a washtub up to his neck. As the dirt dissolves from his skin, he feels lighter, almost as if shedding a second skin he's worn for years. There is relief, yes, but perhaps also a disconcerting feeling of losing a layer of protection. He might rub his arms afterward and find them unfamiliar to the touch, too smooth, vulnerable to the cold air. It is as if the grime he lived in was a kind of armour, and now without it, he is newly tender to the world's harshness. This notion is not so far-fetched. One medieval writer even feared that washing off the body's natural oils and sweat too thoroughly could leave one weak and penetrable by illness. The psychological comfort of a thin film of dirt should not be underestimated. It was the status quo, a steady state that meant all was normal. To be suddenly clean from head to toe was almost an out-of-body experience, something that might happen at birth, in preparation for marriage, or after death when the body was washed for burial. Transitions, all. Thus, being completely clean carried a subtle association with life's turning points and vulnerabilities. And so medieval people lived in a delicate dance with water, drawn to its necessity and even its occasional pleasures, yet ever aware of its perils. They viewed water with respect, even a touch of awe, as one might regard a capricious friend or a fickle deity. In their world, water could purify, but also pollute. It could heal, but also harm. A clear well in the village square was a blessing, a gift from the earth, but a stagnant puddle on the roadside was a threat, possibly harbouring invisible corruptions that bred fevers. Rain from the heavens made crops grow, yet too much left rot and mouldering damp that sickened households. They knew that a person could live longer without food than without water. Yet, the very act of drinking was an act of faith that the water was clean enough for countless diseases lurked in a cup drawn from the wrong stream. Water was fate. It was not tamed by human hands, only borrowed and approached with ritual care. If a man fell ill, his wife might boil water with herbs to wash his brow, a tentative alliance with water to cure. But if the illness worsened, some might say a demon of the water had entered him, and only prayer, or perhaps a different water, holy water, could expel it. As night falls again on the medieval landscape, consider one last image. A monastery perched on a hill, where monks finished their evening prayers. In the cloister garden stands a stone fountain, fed by a spring. By rule, the brothers must wash their hands and faces before the final meal, and so they do, in silence, under the open sky. The water is cold and pure, glimmering in the torchlight. A young monk, new to the order, cups his hands and brings the water to his face. It is a shock, he gasps quietly, at the cold that bites his skin. But he feels something else too, a cleansing not just of sweat and dust, but of the day's burdens. He remembers the biblical exhortation, "Wash and be clean." In that moment, the water feels like a benediction and a trial. He endures the sting of the cold, patting his dripping face dry on a coarse cloth. Around him, the elder monks do the same, without flinching, faces serene and ruddy. They have made their peace with the water's cold embrace, perhaps even come to cherish it as discipline. The young monk draws a breath and smiles faintly. He understands that in this small nightly discomfort lies a key to their faith, acceptance of hardship, and trust in God's elements without fear. And yet, later in his cell, as he lies on his straw pallet, he wonders about the great bathhouse in the city he passed on his journey here. Its doors shuttered now by plague and decree, its baths drained. He wonders what it would be like to sit neck deep in warm water, to truly let go of fear and float. The thought is as distant and fantastical as a childhood dream. With a whispered prayer, he banishes the indulgent fantasy. Outside, the wind picks up, carrying the damp scent of rain. Somewhere in the dark, water drips from the eaves, a rhythmic patter on stone. The monk pulls his blanket tighter, thankful for its warmth, and listens to the water's song. To him, it is neither friend nor foe, but a mystery. One he meets in measured steps, and cautious respect, as all his people do. In this world, water is life, water is fear, and between those two poles stretches the arc of everyday existence, slow and eternal. Each droplet holds a story of caution, every bath a rite of bravery, and in the cradle of the night the medieval world sleeps, unwashed and unafraid, dreaming of water in voices both fearful and reverent. When the medieval body stepped away from water, it stepped toward cloth. Clothing was not decoration first, it was protection. It was a barrier placed carefully between fragile human skin and a hostile world. In the early morning, before labor began, a man or woman did not ask whether their body was clean. They asked whether their clothes were ready. Linen first. Always linen first. A thin, pale layer drawn over the skin, soft with age, worn smooth by countless washings. Linen was trusted in a way water was not. It absorbed sweat without shocking the flesh. It drank the body's oils slowly, patiently, without risk. Where water could chill and weaken, linen comforted. Where bathing exposed the body, linen enclosed it. This inner garment was the true instrument of hygiene. Each morning, as the linen shirt or shift slid over shoulders and hips, it pressed gently against skin already marked by yesterday's labor. The cloth caught the first beads of sweat as they formed. It soaked them in before they could sour the outer air. Over hours, it grew damp, then warm, then heavy with the body's work. And that was its purpose. People understood this without science or theory. They knew, by habit and experience, that the dirt of the body could be managed if it was trapped in cloth. A clean shirt meant a cleaner body. Not truly clean, but safer. That was why linen was washed far more often than skin. At the end of a workday, when the outer garments were stiff with dried sweat and dust, the linen beneath bore the worst of it. When removed, it released a smell that rose like a confession into the room, the scent of a body held close for many hours. Sharp, human, honest. The garment might be rinsed that very evening, scrubbed with lye soap, beaten against stone, wrung out with aching hands. Or it might be hung to wait its turn, replaced by a second shirt, if the household was fortunate enough to own one. This cycle was constant. Wear, soil, wash, wear again. It was through linen that medieval people negotiated their relationship with filth. Outer garments were another matter. Wool cloaks, tunics, gowns, and hose were heavy, valuable, and slow to dry. Washing them required enormous effort and fuel. Wool, when soaked, grew dense and stubborn, holding water like a burden. It could take days to dry fully, especially in cold seasons. Worse still, improper washing could shrink or ruin it entirely. So wool was not washed lightly. Instead, it was aired. Each evening, garments were shaken, brushed, and hung where smoke or night air could pass through them. Smoke was not merely tolerated, it was welcomed. Wood smoke carried oils that discouraged insects and masked the deeper smells of sweat and age. A cloak that smelled faintly of hearth and resin was considered healthier than one that smelled only of the body. Some believed smoke purified cloth. Others simply knew it worked. Brushing was another ritual. A stiff brush scraped away surface dirt and dried mud. Fleas dislodged by the motion jumped away. Dust lifted into the air, catching light before settling elsewhere. It was never eliminated, only relocated. In this way, clothing became a second skin, not clean, but controlled, not fresh, but familiar. The medieval body lived inside layers. Linen against flesh, wool against linen, leather against wool. Each layer slowed the passage of sweat, odor, cold, and insects. Each layer absorbed part of the body's output and returned part of the world's dirt. Together, they formed a shield. This shield was essential because the body itself was seen as vulnerable. Skin was not an impermeable boundary. It was porous, open, responsive. What touched it mattered. Cold water could enter through pores. Bad air could sink in. Disease could pass from surface to blood if the body was unguarded. Clothing sealed the pores, or so it was believed. It kept the body's heat inside and hostile influences outside. This belief shaped daily habits. A person rarely removed all their clothing, except for sleep, illness, or special occasions. Even indoors, garments stayed on. Modesty played a role, but so did caution. To sit bare-skinned near a drafty door or window was to invite chills. To expose damp skin to night air was to court fever, so people dressed carefully. They adjusted layers as the day warmed or cooled. They loosened belts, rolled sleeves, opened collars, but they did not strip. Even bathing, when it occurred, was often done partially clothed. A thin shift might remain on the body, floating in the water, preserving modesty and perhaps a sense of safety. The cloth softened the shock of immersion. It created distance between skin and water. In this way, clothing mediated even cleanliness. It stood between the body and every element. Sweat soaked into linen before it reached wool. Wool held warmth when wind cut through fields. Leather repelled rain and mud. Fur-lined hoods shielded ears from frost. Each material served a function, learned through centuries of survival. Clothing was not fashion first. It was defense. At night, when the body finally rested, clothes still played their part. Work garments were removed slowly, folded or hung if possible. Linen sleeping shifts replaced daywear, cleaner, looser, kinder to skin, already irritated by hours of friction. Bedding absorbed what sweat remained. Straw mattresses drank odors over years until they too had to be replaced. Nothing escaped the body's influence. Nothing. Children learned this early. From childhood, they were taught to change shirts when possible, to air garments, to brush dirt away. Mothers inspected seams and folds where lice hid. Fathers taught sons how to dry cloaks properly so they would not rot. Daughters learned how to scrub linen without tearing it, how to stretch it back into shape, how to hang it so air could move freely. These were hygiene lessons, not spoken as such, but practiced daily. In wealthier homes, wardrobes were larger, linens finer, laundering more frequent. But the principles remained the same. Even nobles relied on clean undergarments more than frequent bathing. Silk and velvet hid bodies that were rarely immersed in water. Perfumed sachets tucked into clothing masked odors. Fur linings were beaten and aired, not washed. Everyone understood the rule. Clean cloth close to skin mattered more than clean skin alone. This was not ignorance. It was adaptation. The medieval world did not offer endless water, cheap fuel, or warm private baths. It offered wind, cold, labor, and long nights. Clothing was the compromise between cleanliness and survival. And so the body moved through its days, wrapped, layered, buffered, protected from cold, protected from gaze, protected imperfectly from itself. Sweat continued to flow, oils continued to rise, dirt continued to cling. But the cloth took the first blow. It absorbed the body's truth quietly. At the end of each day, when garments were removed and hung in dim interiors, they stood as silent witnesses to labor, heavy, damp, darkened, carrying the imprint of the body that wore them. Tomorrow, they would be worn again, and the shield would rise once more between flesh and world. There were things everyone lived with, and no one spoke about. Not in sermons, not in chronicles, not at the table. Yet they shaped every hour of medieval life. Waste was one of them. From the moment a medieval body woke, it produced what could not be kept. Food became refuse. Drink became urgency. The body, so carefully wrapped and guarded, released its excess again and again, quietly, insistently. There was no escape from this rhythm, but there was silence. In the home, the solution was simple and unspoken. A corner, a chamber pot, a bucket kept beneath the bed or near the door. Clay or metal, heavy and cold to the touch, used in darkness, emptied at dawn. The sound of liquid against ceramic was one of the most familiar sounds of night. It was heard, but not acknowledged. Children learned early not to comment. Adults learned to move carefully, to avoid spilling, to breathe shallowly until the task was done. Privacy was minimal. Dignity was preserved by habit rather than architecture. At first light, someone carried the pot outside. Sometimes it was poured into a pit behind the house, sometimes into a ditch, sometimes into the street, where rain and time would take care of it. In larger towns, waste joined other waste, flowing slowly toward rivers already burdened with more than water. No one lingered, no one watched. The work was done quickly and without ceremony. In cities, shared latrines served dozens, sometimes hundreds. Long benches with round holes cut into wood or stone. No partitions, no doors, just proximity and routine. People sat shoulder to shoulder, eyes forward, silent. This was not intimacy, it was necessity. The smell was strong but familiar, the air heavy, flies constant, yet conversation was rare. Waste demanded quiet. To speak too much was to invite discomfort, laughter, or shame, so people waited, and endured, and left. Public latrines were built near running water when possible. Rivers carried away what bodies released. In theory, in practice, waste clung. It settled. It stained stone and soil. It soaked into the ground beneath houses, beneath streets, beneath feet that walked daily above it. The medieval city was layered not only with history, but with residue. Over time, waste shaped the landscape. Ditches filled, pits overflowed, smells lingered in warm months. Entire neighborhoods carried reputations for foul air. People noticed patterns. Illness followed stench. Fever followed damp ground. Death followed neglect. Yet the connection was vague, uncertain, more felt than understood. The language of the time spoke of corruption, of foulness, of imbalance. Bad air was feared more than dirty hands, and so waste was hidden as best it could be. Floors were strewn with rushes or straw, replaced periodically. These absorbed spills, drips, and accidents. Over time, they grew dark and sour, then were swept away and replaced. Again and again, silence followed these acts. No one described them. No one wrote them down. Because they were universal. Even monasteries, places of prayer and order, dealt with waste in similar ways. Latrine towers extended, overflowing streams. The sound of water below masked other sounds. Monks passed one another on narrow walkways, eyes lowered, habits brushing stone. Spiritual life did not erase bodily needs. It simply enclosed them in routine. At night, the fear was different. Darkness turned urgency into danger. To step outside meant risking a fall, a chill, or worse. So chamber pots remained close. Accidents happened. Sheets were soiled. Mattresses absorbed what could not be helped. Shame was brief. Work remained. Sheets were washed. Straw replaced. Life continued. Children were taught early how to manage their bodies. Where to go, when to go, how to clean afterward. Hands were wiped, rags used, water saved for later washing. Cleanliness after waste mattered. Not because of germs, but because of order. Waste was disorder. It reminded people of mortality, of decay. It was handled quickly, quietly, and then forgotten. Or rather, never mentioned again. In streets, gutters carried more than rain. They carried the evidence of daily life. Food scraps, ash, animal droppings, human refuse. Shoes stepped through it, skirts brushed it, wheels splashed it upward when carts passed. The smell followed. People grew used to it. Noses adapted, minds adjusted. What would overwhelm a modern visitor became background noise, a constant presence, like wind or distant bells. This acceptance was not ignorance, it was endurance. People cleaned what they could. They washed hands. They aired clothes. They sprinkled herbs. They burned incense. They prayed. But waste could not be eliminated, only managed. Silence helped. By not speaking of it, people contained it mentally. They focused on work, prayer, family, seasons. They accepted that the body produced what the earth would eventually reclaim. In this way, waste became part of the cycle. Food from soil, body from food, waste back to soil. It was not poetic, but it was real. At night, as families settled into sleep, the sounds returned. A cough, a shifting body, a pot lifted and replaced, the quiet splash of liquid, the scrape of wood on floor. No one stirred. No one commented. Morning would come soon enough. And with it, the routine of removal. Silence preserved dignity. Silence preserved sanity. The medieval world survived not by ignoring waste, but by refusing to dwell on it. It existed. It was handled. And then life moved on. A pale dawn breaks over the medieval countryside. The sky blooms with the first light, revealing a world slowly stirring from darkness. In a small village, a thin haze of wood smoke already curls from cottage roofs. The air is cool and damp, carrying the earthy odour of dew settling on fields and thatch. A rooster's crow echoes softly. Inside a wattle and daub hut, the farmer's family awakens. The single room of their home holds the layered smells of the night, the smoky remnants of yesterday's fire lingering in the thatch, the musty straw of the bedding, and the faint sour-sweet note of human presence. Sweat and breath accumulated in the still air. It is a close, lived-in smell, one so familiar to its inhabitants that they scarcely perceive it at all. It is simply home. As morning brightens, the farmer pushes open the wooden shutter of the cottage window. Fresh air sighs in, mingling with the stale warmth inside. He inhales deeply. To him, the odor of the outdoors is gentle. The green aroma of crushed grass outside the threshold and the distant scent of damp soil from the fields. Stepping out, he is greeted by the tang of a nearby byre, where the cow shifts in her stall. The sharp ammonia hint of overnight manure pricks his nose only mildly. He has tended cattle since boyhood, and to him the barn smells are ordinary, even comforting. The mild reek of the animal's bedding, dirty and trampled, does not trouble him. Instead, as he opens the byre, he pats the cow's flank and notes that she is healthy. Her stall's pungency is a sign of a well-fed beast. In this world, scents speak of life and livelihood. The farmer feels the rough wood of the stall door and hears the soft lowing of the cow as morning light slants in dusty beams across moats in the air. The everyday odors of livestock and last night's hay mingle with the cool dawn, forming a familiar haze of fragrance that settles in the farmyard. Across the lane, the baker's boy is already up to stoke the ovens. Soon, a warm, yeasty smell wafts from the bakehouse. It is a welcome note that drifts through the village, as comforting as the gentle grey smoke that rises from the chimney. Inside the bakery, the air is thick and flour-laden, smelling of fermenting dough and ashes. The boy dusts his hands on his apron, releasing little puffs of flour dust. He barely notices the perpetual coat of flour on the floorboards or the sour tang of old ale used in the dough. It's simply part of the bakery's atmosphere. When the first loaves bake, a rich aroma of crust and grain spills out into the street. Villagers breathe it in appreciatively. On this morning, it masks less pleasant notes, like the whiff of sewage from the open gutter that runs along the central dirt road. In the cool hours, that gutter is relatively still, emitting only a faint odor of yesterday's waste. A stray dog laps at a puddle in the ditch, unperturbed. The people of the village pass by on their morning tasks, stepping over the rivulet of refuse with practiced unconcern. To them, this is normal. The mix of good and bad smells, fresh bread and foul ditch, is the olfactory tapestry of daily life. As the sun climbs higher, the village begins to bustle. A swineherd drives his pigs down the road toward the woods. The animals trot and snort, leaving droppings in their wake. A few villagers wrinkle their noses at the stronger barnyard smell that trails behind the herd. But no one complains aloud. Manure on the road is as common as mud. It joins the medley of scents underfoot. Chickens peck at the dirt, kicking up dry dust that carries the faint odor of sun-baked earth. Women emerge from doorways to sweep their thresholds, stirring the ground and releasing an earthy scent mixed with traces of old rushes strewn on the floor. These cottage floors, often simply packed earth, are sometimes covered in straw or dried rushes for comfort. Over time, the rushes absorb spills and dirt. If you kneel close, you might catch a fusty smell where ale or soup dripped last eve. But periodically the families will gather fresh rushes from the riverside and lay them down anew. In some homes, they scatter aromatic herbs among the floor rushes, bits of lavender, thyme, or chamomile crushed underfoot to sweeten the air. When trod upon, these herbs release gentle perfumes that help mask the mustiness and deter insects. With each season, as part of good housekeeping, the old rushes are swept out before they rot or grow. Too rank and fresh ones laid, filling the home with the pleasant fragrance of green plants and meadow flowers once again. This small ritual keeps the cottage from becoming too foul and brings a note of the outside into the very floor of daily life. From the simple cottages to the modest manor house on the hill, morning rituals of cleanliness are underway. In a little manor kitchen, a servant girl opens a narrow window to let out the stale night air. The manor, built of stone, holds the cold and damp. Overnight, a musty chill settled in its halls. Now the girl sweeps the flagstones and sprinkles water to tame the dust. She retrieves a basket of dried herbs, meadowsweet and basil, and tosses handfuls onto the floor. As she sweeps, these bruised herbs lend a fresh, green scent that mingles with the underlying damp stone odour. In the great hall, another servant has raked out yesterday's rushes from the dais where the lord and lady dine. The old rushes gave off a tired, stale smell after a winter's use. Replacing them with clean mats woven of new rushes, he also scatters rose petals and fennel fronds among them. As the petals are crushed by footsteps, a delicate floral note rises, subtly covering any lingering odours of last night's feast. It is quiet in the manor at this hour, with only the crackle of the kitchen fire and the distant clucking of hens outside. The aroma of wood smoke from the hearth twines with the sweetness of herbs. Even in relative wealth, the medieval household is never free of smells, good and bad, so they are managed and balanced, not eliminated. The lady of the house, descending the stairs in a trailing gown, breathes in the newly refreshed air of her hall with satisfaction. It smells clean enough by her standards, a mingling of herb-strewn floor, smoke from incense she burned at dawn in the chapel, and faintly the residual odours of humanity that even a manor cannot escape. In towns and cities, morning brings an even greater chorus of smells. As the sun warms the twisting streets, a haze seems to rise from the very cobbles. Last night's refuse, dumped into the street gutters, awakens under the heat. By custom, chamber pots and slop buckets were emptied after dark, tossed from doorways or windows into the alleys, often with a shouted warning, though not always. In the early light, one can see the evidence. Puddles and piles of waste glistening in the road and at the foot of walls. Flies buzz around them. A passing cartwheel squelches through a heap of dung, grinding it into the mud. These streets serve as the city's sewers, virtually indistinguishable from sewers themselves. Everything goes into them: kitchen slops, animal entrails, the leavings of chamber pots. The smell that rises is a potent brew of rotten filth, unmistakable yet oddly routine. Townsfolk cover their noses briefly if a particularly offensive odour strikes. A sudden putrid whiff from a rotting dog carcass by the road, or the ammoniac sting from a corner where many have relieved themselves. But mostly, they carry on. They have lived in this atmosphere all their lives. It is the scent of home as much as it is of squalor. Children play on the edges of the street, not minding the stench. Shopkeepers sweep the front of their stalls, pushing decaying vegetable matter aside with casual efficiency. The foulness is simply part of the environment, noticed most by those who are new or by the fastidious rich who seldom venture into these quarters. A traveller coming in through the city gate at noon might gag at first breath. The assault of odours can be overwhelming to a stranger. Smoke from countless hearths and forges hangs in a haze. The reek of tanneries and dyers' vats, acrid and biting, wafts on the breeze from the river quarter. Human sweat and the press of unwashed bodies in the market exude a sour, lively musk. To the newcomer, It's a chaos of stenches and perfumes fighting for dominance. Yet the city dwellers weave through the narrow streets unperturbed. They step around a mound of horse droppings as unconsciously as one avoids a puddle. A fishmonger dumps a bucket of yesterday's spoiled fish guts into a ditch. A gush of rank, fishy decay momentarily overpowers the nose. A couple of nearby shoppers grimace and shuffle away to another stall, but within moments they've forgotten it and return to haggling over herring and eels. By long habit, they tune out the worst of it. The fishmonger himself barely registers the stench. It clings to his apron and hands, and has for years. It is said that those who labour amid strong odours lose the sharpness of their own sense of smell. The smell becomes part of them, and thus invisible to their senses. Indeed, stench is in the nose of the beholder. What one person finds unbearable, another has learned to accept as ordinary background to life. A tanner lives day by day in the miasma of urine-soaked hides and rotting flesh from the tannery pits. And while an outsider might reel from the odour, the tanner eats his noon bread with calm indifference beside the vat. His nose has adapted out of necessity. In a time when few professions were clean, people learned early to withstand and ignore the smells of their trade. At the open-air market in the town square, fragrances and fetors swirl in equal measure. A spice seller's stand draws passers-by with the exotic perfume of cinnamon, cloves, and pepper escaping from wooden boxes. Not far off, a butcher's stall sends forth the metallic scent of fresh blood and the heavier odour of offal that has sat in the sun too long. Over everything lies a base note of humanity, the warm, greasy smell of crowds pressed together, a medley of breath, body odour, and dirty clothes. On a hot day, this smell is thick and palpable. People glisten with sweat as they jostle for goods. Dark crescents stain the armpits of tunics and gowns. Bathing is infrequent for most. Many common folk own only the clothes on their back. Those garments have absorbed smoke from hearths, the dirt of labour, and the perspiration of weeks. The rankness of unwashed wool and unbathed skin would make a modern nose wrinkle, but here it raises little comment. It is said that in an overcrowded urban ward, the very air itself was pretty stinking, partly thanks to the inhabitants. Yet within that ward, life continues normally. People are accustomed to each other's smell. If anything, it is strangeness that causes notice. The unexpected whiff of perfume as a richly dressed lady passes by, or the penetrating funk of a particularly neglected beggar who has not washed in many months. These out-of-the-ordinary scents stand out against the familiar background odour in which everyone moves. Indeed, social class and circumstance set the stage for one's smells. The fine lady, gliding through the market, has dabbed her neck with rose oil and carries a pomander, a gilded ball pierced with holes, inside which lies a paste of ambergris and musk. Around her travels a tiny cloud of sweetness, marking her status as clearly as her silk veil. As she passes near the fish stalls, she raises a kerchief to her nose. The cloth has been sprinkled with orange blossom water. She does this without thinking. It is a reflex born of breeding. To shield herself from the bad air and offensive street odours that she believes can bring illness. To her, the stink of fish and sweat and garbage is not the smell of home, as it is to the fishmonger, but a threat to health and decorum. Her servants will later recall how she shuddered at the filth of the lower quarters. Meanwhile, the fishmonger's wife, watching the lady hurry past, sniffs disdainfully at the heavy perfume that lingers in the air. She finds it cloying and strange, a scent for idlers, perhaps, not for honest folk who smell of honest work. In that moment, each regards the other's smell as unpleasant, even abnormal. Normality, it seems, lies in the nose accustomed to it. The differences between classes extend into their homes and habits, creating distinct worlds of scent. Imagine stepping into a peasant's cottage. The door is low and the interior dim. The smoke from the central hearth has no chimney to escape through, so it fills the space with a perpetual haze. Everything, the rough wool tunics hanging on pegs, the timber beams, the thatch overhead, is imbued with the scent of wood smoke and cured over years like an old ham. The family does not cough or cry at the smoke. Their eyes and lungs have long adapted to this daily irritation. The smell to them is mild and homely, a protective cloak that even keeps insects at bay. On the walls hang bundles of dried herbs, not for decoration, but for cooking and medicine. Sage, dill, and maybe a string of garlic lend faint spice notes to the air. A pot of pottage simmers over the fire, adding its own hearty aroma, cabbage and onions, an odour both sharp and comforting, with hints of salt pork fat. In one corner, a goat kids in a small pen. The sharp animal smell of her adds to the tapestry of scent. The dirt floor has been sprinkled with clean, dry straw, which absorbs spills and is changed when it grows too trodden. The children playing on that floor smell of outdoors and dirt and a bit of sour milk from breakfast. The mother, stirring the pot, has hands that carry the smell of the soil. She pulled turnips from the earth this morning, and a hint of lye soap from scrubbing the washing. It is wash day, and a large wooden tub sits outside the door where linens are soaking. She used wood ash lye and soapwort to cleanse the fabric. The air around the tub is biting with alkaline fumes and scented with wild marjoram she crushed in, hoping to leave a freshness in the cloth. Soon she and the other village women will carry heavy wet sheets to the river to rinse, beating them on the rocks. The river water is cold and brownish. As they wring out the linens, the women chat and laugh, not bothered by the murkiness of the water. They know the same river carries away the village's waste downstream. But that is the way of things. Water cleans even as it dirties. Hanging the laundry to dry on bushes, the women take a certain pleasure in the sight of white linen in the sun and the brief aroma of something like cleanliness. Sun-warmed cloth with a hint of herb and ash. They have done what they can to keep their family's garments fresh, at least for a time. By evening, the clothes will smell of smoke and sweat again, but for now, they breathe in the fleeting scent of cleanliness with quiet satisfaction. Contrast this with the home of a noble. Passing through the fortified gate into the castle courtyard, the first smells are not so different from the village. Horses and hay, dung and dust. Stables line one wall, and the grooms are already at work mucking out the stalls. The pungent ammonia stench of urine mixes with the sweeter smell of hay and the warm animal scent of steeds. The lord's favourite stallion pokes his head out, snorting, and the groom pats its neck, untroubled by the odours. It's said, one can tell a stable hand by the smell that never quite leaves his clothes and skin. A blend of horse sweat, leather, and manure. This, too, is a badge of honest labour, though the courtiers pinch their noses in jest when a groom's duties bring him into the castle's great hall. From the courtyard, one ascends stone steps into the heart of the castle. Here the air turns cooler and carries a different mustiness. The mineral damp of stone walls that see little sunlight. Tapestries and arras hang on these walls, intended to insulate and decorate, but over the years they have absorbed the smells of smoke and human proximity. A faint odor of age clings to the heavy woven fabrics, like dust and faded dye. In the great hall, high windows let in beams of light that catch the haze of dust motes. The floor here is strewn with rushes or woven rush mats, as in humbler homes, but more care is taken to keep them fresh. The Lord's servants changed these rushes at the start of spring. Herbs, such as lavender, rosemary, and mint, were mixed in, so that even now, weeks later, one can still detect traces of their pleasant fragrance when walking across the floor. It lends an atmosphere of herbal freshness that almost, but not entirely, masks the underlying realities, the faint funk of spilled ale from many a past banquet, or the smell of dogs that sleep by the hearth, or simply the presence of many people whose cleanliness is imperfect. On a polished table in this hall sits a bowl of rose water. The nobles have just finished their midday meal. They ate richly spiced, stewed meat and wine, the aromas of which still linger in the hall, pepper, ginger, and roast fat hanging in the air. Now each guest takes a turn at the rosewater bowl, dipping fingers in to rinse away grease. A subtle rosy perfume rises from the water as they do so. This custom of offering scented water is a mark of refinement and hospitality. The nobles value cleanliness, at least of the visible sort, more than commoners might expect. Their faces and hands are often washed, their fingernails cleaned, their beards and hair perfumed with oils. One courtly gentleman, having dried his hands on a linen towel, unwraps a small packet and produces a clove. Placing it in his mouth, he chews thoughtfully. Its strong spice helps freshen the breath after the meal. Many nobles and learned folk chew cloves or parsley for this purpose, aware that a foul breath is unpleasant in conversation. The clove's intense aroma momentarily overcomes the other smells around him. In the upper chambers of the castle, the ladies have their own regimen. A maid airs out a luxurious gown of Italian wool, one of the ladies' favourites. It had been stored in an oak chest, with sprigs of dried lavender and cedar chips, to prevent moths and impart a sweet scent. As the maid lifts it, a delicate waft of lavender perfumes the room. The lady, meanwhile, dabs on a bit of perfume from a vial brought by a trader from the east. It's an attar of roses, rich and heady. Only a drop is needed. She knows that true bathing in a tub is a rare luxury, perhaps undertaken a few times a year, when enough firewood and time can be spared to heat the water, but she does wash frequently in parts. Each morning she used a basin to cleanse her face, underarms, and privy areas with water scented by herbs. Many in her class do so. A full-body bath may be uncommon, but partial washing and good scents help maintain a sense of dignity and comfort. She powders her hair with ground orris root, which smells of violets, and has her maid lightly dust her skin with a mixture of ground dried roses and spices. Stepping out of her solar, she leaves behind an invisible cloud of floral and spice notes that anyone passing will notice as evidence of her presence. This personal fragrance sets her apart from the lower servants who might smell of sweat or plain lye soap from their work. Yet even with such efforts, The castle is not a place of unmixed sweetness. In the corridor, behind a heavy wooden door, lies the garderobe, the privy used by the family. Opening that door, one is met with a strong latrine smell, the accumulated odour of human waste dropping down a shaft into a cesspit or moat below. The design keeps the most unpleasant matter out of sight, but not entirely out of smell. A draught often wafts up, especially on warm days, carrying the ripe stench into the adjacent passages. To combat this, the chamberlain burns frankincense or sprinkles juniper berries in the garderobe, their resinous smoke helping to quell the malodor. Still, a sensitive nose can detect that undercurrent of ammonia and decay if near the privy door. The family has learned to hurry past that spot, breathing through their mouths or pressing a pomander to the nose. They don't linger there, much as any commoner would avoid standing near an overflowing cesspit in town. Despite wealth and walls, some smells respect no boundary. Odour wafts over boundaries, reaching those who had no part in its creation. A lord might wear silk and jewels, but if the wind blows the wrong way, the smell of his serfs' pigsties, or the nearby town's tanneries, may find his nostrils just the same. In response, he might order those offending trades to move further off. Indeed, many cities decree that butchers, tanners, and other smelly trades operate outside the walls. For the most part, this keeps the worst stenches at a distance from genteel noses. But on certain days, when the air is heavy and still, even a distant tannery's reek can creep back in. On those days, the noble folk retreat to inner rooms with scented candles and smouldering herbs to wait it out. Back in the town, as afternoon wanes, the air cools and the odorscape shifts again. In the lanes, a few ragged children drag a cart collecting manure. Dried horse dung can be used as fuel or fertilizer, so even filth has its purpose. They giggle and play as they work. To them, the smell is of little concern, except when a truly putrid glob is encountered, and then they might make a face and tease each other. A peddler pushes through, carrying a basket of herbs and remedies. The scent of his wares announces him: rosemary, sage, and wormwood, tied in little bundles and small jars of pomades. Townswomen buy these to freshen their homes, or themselves. A sprig of rosemary hung by the door, it is thought, deters illness and evil, and it lends a clean, piney smell. Some tuck lavender or mint among their clothes to ward off moths and smells, a practice aped from the nobility in simpler form. Now the sun is low. Many of the day's smells have sunk back into the ground or been dispersed by the breeze, but the evening brings its own redolence from taverns and cookshops. Smoke and roasting meat scent the twilight. A traveller following his nose might find the local alehouse by the yeasty, slightly sour smell of spilled beer and the grill smoke of beef skewers charring over coals. Inside the tavern, the atmosphere is close and convivial. The rush-strewn floor is sticky with dripped ale. Each step on the straw releases a dizzying mixture: old beer, mud from boots, maybe a hint of vomit in a corner, not fully cleaned. Benches are filled with labourers, easing their aches with a drink. The air is ripe with human presence. A day's sweat clings to everyone. In summer, the warmth of packed bodies can turn the tavern into a stew of odour, nearly as thick as the smoke that clouds the rafters from the fire and cheap tallow candles. But nobody minds much. Indeed, they lean in closer to hear each other over the din, unfazed by each other's scent. Laughter and chatter fill the room. The bard strikes a lute, and a gentle melody floats above the hubbub. The tavern keeper ladles stew from an iron pot. Its savoury aroma of garlic, parsley, and mutton momentarily cutting through the other smells, and causing a collective mouth-watering. The men slap their bellies appreciatively. If a stranger were to complain about the stink, these tavern regulars might not even understand at first. What stink? To their noses, nothing here is noteworthy, save perhaps that the stew smells particularly good tonight, or that someone at the back is smoking hemp in a pipe, and even that acrid herbal smoke simply blends in. Only if a truly egregious odour arises, say a patron who stepped in something awful outside and tracked it in, might they wave their hands and demand he clean his boots. Otherwise, they drink and speak as if in any comfortable environment, their senses long since taught to filter out the background odours of life. Night deepens. In the wealthy quarters, beeswax candles give off a warm, clean scent as they burn in chandeliers. A far cry from the smoky reek of tallow dips used in poorer homes. A noblewoman sits in her chamber, brushing her hair by candlelight. The window is cracked open to admit the night air. From the gardens below, the sweet fragrance of evening primroses and late-blooming jasmine drifts in, planted deliberately beneath her window. She breathes it in, enjoying its natural perfume that overlays the faint residual smell of the chamber pot under the bed emptied earlier, but never completely without trace. In a little while, a servant will burn a pinch of dried rosemary and thyme in a brazier to bless the room and keep pests away before the household retires to sleep. Such rituals are believed to purify the air, both spiritually and physically. Meanwhile, down in the narrow alleys of the town, the night soil men come to work. Under the cover of darkness, these gong farmers go about their malodorous task, cleaning out the cesspits and latrines. Two men lift buckets brimming with raw human waste, their faces wrapped in cloths. The stench is eye-watering, thick as a blanket. But these men are strangely immune. They make crude jokes as they haul the filth. The foul smell has become so much a part of their occupation that they can withstand it for hours. Still, even they recognize degrees of foulness. A pit long unemptied, or a carcass rotting in a sewer, will make them gag briefly, cursing, before they steel themselves again. They load the waste onto a cart. Tonight, they will carry it beyond the city walls to dump it in the fields, or perhaps into the river on the outgoing tide. As they pass through the streets, anyone still out tips their hat and quickly steps aside, partly out of respect, for this is dirty, necessary work, and partly because the miasma trailing the cart is nearly unbearable at close range. Most town residents, however, are abed by now, windows shuttered. They will awake to find their cesspit miraculously lowered, the worst of the stench removed, for now. None think of the gong farmer's lot with envy, but all appreciate that their own homes smell sweeter come morning for his efforts. It is a small victory against the encroaching odours of living. In a church on the edge of town, the midnight mass has ended. As the last worshippers file out, the priest snuffs the altar candles. The rich smell of incense still hangs in the rafters, heavy frankincense and myrrh, burned during the liturgy, their holy smoke purifying the sacred space. The priest's robes are permeated with it, as is his very skin. Day after day of services and prayers in perfumed clouds, have marked him with a scent of sanctity. It is said that any monk, nun, or priest can be known by the smell of incense that clings to their hair and cloaks. In the darkness of the church now, that spicy sweet odour of incense intermingles with more human smells. The faint waxiness of extinguished candles, the sweat of many congregants that briefly filled the pews, and the cold stone smell of the building itself. To the devout, the incense is a fragrance of heaven, a welcome contrast to the rankness of the world outside. Many a poor soul, upon entering the church, sighs with relief at that sudden sweetness in the air, feeling it wash over them like a blessing. For a short time, they can forget the dung and sweat outside and imagine the celestial aroma of paradise. The church knows the power of scent to inspire and to mask the less pleasant. On holy days, garlands of flowers might be strewn, and the floors swept extra clean, so that the church becomes an oasis of fragrance in a smelly town. When the faithful depart back into the night, some carry with them a sprig of herbs given as alms, or just the memory of that incense as a balm against the night's odours. And the night is indeed odorous. With fewer human activities, other scents emerge. The cool wind carries the smell of the nearby river through the streets, a mix of water, mud, and the refuse thrown in. The river is the city's drain and lifeblood both. By day, its smell is masked by everything else, but at night one can catch it. A dank, half-clean, half-dirty smell of silt and decaying matter being swept slowly out to sea. In London, for instance, the Thames at low tide would expose black mud and rotten waste, giving off a choking odour. But mercifully, the incoming tide would wash in fresher water to dilute the filth. Many a town on a river sleeps more peacefully, knowing that nature provides a nightly cleansing of sorts. In towns without rivers, the smells accumulate until a heavy rain mercifully scours the streets. In a poor shack by the town wall, a family sleeps close together on a straw pallet. The father's ragged cloak is draped over the children as a blanket. In sleep, they notice no smells. But if one were to stand over them, one would smell sour sweat from bodies that laboured hard and had no chance to wash before collapsing into slumber. You'd smell the oil of the lamp they extinguished, a smoky flax smell that still hangs about, perhaps a faint odour of urine where a toddler had an accident in the corner. These things are unremarkable in their life. The father might wake once in the night, nose slightly wrinkling at a whiff of that accident. He'll toss some fresh straw there in the morning. He is used to it. Such minor discomforts do not trouble his heart. Far more disturbing to him would be a truly alien smell, the fetor of disease, for example. In times of plague, he remembers, the air itself took on a dreadful sweetness and rot, a smell that terrified everyone because it was not normal. Medieval people feared bad air that came with sickness, believing it carried death. If ever this man smells the peculiar reek of plague again, a mingling of sweat, pestilence, and decay, he will flee if he can, or burn rosemary to ward it off, heart pounding. But tonight, the smells around him are within the bounds of ordinary life, familiar and therefore safe. He and his family sleep on, breathing the dense aroma of their own world with untroubled lungs. Across the social spectrum, from pauper to prince, there is a shared understanding, often unspoken, about the role of smell in daily life. Everyone, high and low, lives immersed in odours. In the medieval view, these odours are not neutral background. They carry meaning and effect. A fragrant smell can uplift the spirit or signal holiness, while a foul stench can disgust or even corrupt one's health. Yet people cannot escape them, so they learn to live with them. They cultivate the fragrant where they can, in posies of flowers hung in a cottage, or in precious imported perfumes at court, and they endure the malodorous where they must. It is remarkable how the mind can adjust. A medieval artisan can spend all day in a tannery reeking of dog dung and rancid hide, and go home to supper without losing his appetite. A lady can walk through her rose garden, enjoying that perfume, and moments later accept that using the privy will not be pleasant. She pinches her nose and carries on. People know when something smells bad, of course. They complain to authorities if a neighbour's cesspit overflows unbearably, or if a butcher tosses guts too close to homes. There are laws and fines for creating a stench that offends others. They are not immune to disgust. But their threshold is higher, conditioned by constant exposure. What might make a modern person gag might earn only a shrug or a wry joke from a medieval person. Psychologically and emotionally, they adapt. The first shock of a foul smell might raise an outcry, but soon it fades into the tapestry of the everyday. We can imagine the emotional landscape that accompanies these smells. The comforting tranquility of a familiar smell. A child burying his face in his mother's apron, smelling flour, milk, and sweat. The essence of maternal comfort for that time and place. A craftsman finding solace in the resinous odour of the wood shavings curling from his plane, that pleasant woody smell that tells him he's home in his workshop. Even the soldier finds a strange reassurance in the smell of oiled leather and steel of his gear. It's the smell of preparedness and camaraderie among his fellows. On the other hand, the shock of an out-of-place smell can bring fear or disgust. A townsman catching a rare whiff of corruption, perhaps a dead rat under the floorboards, and feeling uneasy until it's found and removed, for rot is ominous. Or a noblewoman catching the rank sweat of a beggar who's been allowed into the hall for charity. She might feel a flush of pity mingled with revulsion, not accustomed to such unmasked human odour. What was normal in medieval times was not the absence of smell, but the presence of many smells all at once, a layered, ever-shifting background to every moment of life. People expected life to be fragrant and foul by turns. A spring day might bring the sweet scent of blossoms and the reek of the manure cart in the same breeze. A trip to market was as much a journey through a gauntlet of odours as it was a social or commercial venture. People's noses were important tools. They identified whether food was fresh or spoiled by smell. They diagnosed illness by the breath or bodily odours of the sick. They even gauged each other's social standing and habits by scent. A lady's sandalwood fan, perfumed with rose attar, signalled refinement. A peasant reeking of fish or dung signalled his toil. Yet, in the mingling crowds, these signals became a tapestry in which no thread dominated for long, and importantly, much of it went unnoticed in the moment-to-moment experience. Medieval writings and records, when they do mention smell, often note the extremes, the worst stenches, or the loveliest perfumes, precisely because the ordinary mixture was unremarkable. Offensive smells were those that stood out violently from the norm. A tannery that polluted a whole district, a privy gone neglected, a carcass tainting the air. These drew attention and often action. Cleaning, banishment outside city walls, or covering up with sweet incense. Pleasant smells, too, were cherished, partly because they rose above the baseline funk of daily life. The intense bouquet of a rose, the freshness of a pine bough on the floor at Christmas, or the rare luxury of a woman's perfumed hair. In a world of many smells, a pure and singular fragrance was a delight. As night wears on toward the small hours, the world grows quieter. A light rain begins to fall over the town. The water patters on the roofs and cobbles, making a soothing rhythm. With it comes relief. The rain washes into the gutters, carrying away some of the day's accumulated filth. The petrichor of wet earth rises, clean and nostalgic. In the fields outside, the rain releases the green smell of grass and soil, a scent that drifts even into town. Some sleepers stir, subconsciously noting the change. The air from the window now smells a bit fresher, cooler, easing their dreams. The city will never smell like a rose garden. But for a brief moment, the gentle scent of rain dampens the harsher odors. By morning, the cycle will begin anew. Fires lit will add smoke, markets will add sweat and spice, life will add its refuse. But that is tomorrow. In this medieval world, smell is the ever-present backdrop, a defining element of normality. People navigate it as fish swim through water, largely unaware of the medium surrounding them, until something out of the ordinary forces it into consciousness. The townsman doesn't smell the muck of the streets as he hurries to work. He only notices the choking stench when a summer drought has left the garbage rotting in heaps, or when he visits a country meadow and realizes, for a moment, how sweet the air could be by contrast. The peasant woman doesn't mind the odor of her goats and chickens, but she keeps a bundle of mint near her bed because she believes its bright scent keeps away pestilence. And besides, she likes how it overlays the barnyard must for a while. Every class, every person has their thresholds and little strategies, but all are united in the basic fact that smell is everywhere and inescapable. And so, as the village cock crows to herald another dawn, the medieval folk rise and inhale the morning with acceptance. A new day's medley of smells begins to brew. The hearth smoke, the hay, the leather, the sweat, the roses, the manure, the fish, the incense, the rain, and countless more. This is the normal life of the nose in the Middle Ages. Layered odours, constant and evolving, form the atmosphere they live in as surely as the clouds above, or the ground underfoot. They may not have words for all these sensations, but they feel them deeply. The comfort, the disgust, the indifference, the adaptation. Over time, they have woven these smells into the fabric of their existence. The nose, after all, knows what is usual and finds equilibrium. In that equilibrium lies a kind of peace, the ability to lie down at the end of the day in a smoke-scented, human-scented hut, or a herb-strewn, draughty hall, and breathe easily, thinking not of odour but of one's hopes, labours, and prayers. Outside, the rain stops, and a gentle mist rises from the ground. A rainbow of mist catches the dawn light. A farmer walks out to his fields, the damp soil squelching under his boots and releasing a rich earthen smell. He hardly notices it. He is thinking of the day's work. In the town, a shopkeeper opens his shutters and sniffs the air. "It's less foul than yesterday," he muses, perhaps thanks to the rain. He sets out a bowl of vinegar at his doorway, an old habit to cleanse the air which, at the very least, adds a sharp, clean note outside his shop. A nun in the convent gardens clips fresh lavender and rue, inhaling their medicinal, calming aroma as the church bells toll. Another day begins, scented and normal to those who live it. The people of this age carry on, surrounded by the redolence of their world, seldom remarking on it, but ever shaped by it. Smell is their constant companion, weaving through the narrative of their lives as seamlessly as the rising and setting of the sun. In this slow, unhurried moment of history, we leave them there, breathing in the medieval morn, adapting, enduring, and finding small joys in the fragrances that lighten their days. Theirs is a world of smell and normality intertwined, a testament to human resilience and perception. And as the listener drifts into sleep, one can almost imagine being there, enfolded in that tapestry of ancient scents, experiencing life in a time when every breath was filled with the rich aroma of a world long ago, strange, yet strangely homey, and always, always alive with smell. Night did not arrive suddenly in the medieval world. It crept in. The light faded slowly, stretching shadows across walls and floors. Colours softened, then disappeared. The last work of the day was finished, not by clock, but by sight. When hands could no longer see what they were doing, the day was over. Inside homes, the fire was banked lower. Wood was precious. Flames were coaxed, not fed freely. The glow from embers painted faces in warm orange and deep shadow. This was the hour of routine. Not rest yet. Not sleep yet. The body still needed care. Hands were washed again. Faces wiped. Feet rinsed if water remained. The motions were slow, practiced, economical. No one wasted energy at night. Every movement had a reason. Clothes came off layer by layer. Outer garments first, heavy, damp from sweat, stiff where salt had dried into wool. Tunics were lifted over tired shoulders, released with a sigh. Hose peeled away from legs that ached with use. Shoes removed carefully, loosened with fingers that were cracked and sore. These garments were not dropped carelessly. They were hung near the hearth, on pegs, over rails. Smoke would do its quiet work through the night, drying, masking, protecting. Linen came next. The underclothes, softer, darker, with the day's labour. These were folded or placed aside. If another clean shift was available, it was put on for sleeping. If not, the same linen would serve again. The medieval night did not promise freshness. It promised continuation. Bodies settled. People sat close to the fire for warmth. Children leaned against parents. The elderly wrapped themselves tightly in cloaks, even indoors. The cold crept through walls, through floors, through bones. Winter or summer, night always cooled the body, and cooling was dangerous. Cold invited sickness. Cold stiffened joints. Cold weakened the body's defenses. So people moved closer together, shared warmth, shared breath. The smells of the day softened into the smells of night. Smoke dominated, sweat faded, food lingered faintly. Straw released its dry, dusty scent as bedding was prepared. Mattresses were simple. Ticks stuffed with straw, hay, or leaves. They crackled when weight pressed down. Over time they absorbed everything the body released: sweat, oils, accidents, tears, blood from small wounds. No one expected them to be clean. They were expected to last. Before lying down, there was often a final inspection of the body. A mother checked a child's scalp by firelight. Fingers parted hair. A comb passed slowly, methodically. Lice were crushed without comment. Nits scraped away. A wife examined her husband's hands. Redness, cracks, swelling. She rubbed grease or herbal salve into raw skin if she had it. Lard mixed with herbs. Simple, effective. Feet were rubbed, ankles pressed, backs eased. Touch mattered at night. It was medicine. As the fire died lower, people lay down, not in silence. Night had its own sounds. The shifting of straw, the cough of someone lying awake, the crackle of embers settling, the distant bark of a dog, wind against shutters, rain on thatch. Inside the body, sounds continued too. Breathing, stomachs digesting, the occasional groan of discomfort. Sleep came slowly. There was no illusion of perfect rest. The medieval night was long, but not uninterrupted. People woke often, to cold, to pain, to hunger, to need. A man stirred, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. A woman adjusted a child closer to her warmth. Someone rose quietly to use the chamber pot, careful not to wake others. The pot's cool rim met skin. The sound was brief, the act quick, the smell accepted. Sleep returned in fragments. Dreams were shallow, often practical. Fields, fires, water, fear. The body never fully let go. It remained alert. Parasites moved at night. Fleas emerged from bedding. Lice shifted closer to warmth. Scratching was common. Automatic. Half-conscious. A leg rubbed against another. A shoulder scratched against straw. Hands moved without waking the mind. This was normal. So was waking chilled. In colder months, breath fogged the air, even indoors. The cold crept through blankets. Noses grew numb, fingers stiff. People slept clothed, sometimes heavily clothed. Shifts, tunics, even cloaks. Whatever preserved warmth, sleeping naked was rare outside the wealthiest homes. And even there, not always wise. The night demanded protection. Bodies huddled, heat conserved, blankets layered, time stretched. Without clocks, the night was measured by sensation, by how often one woke, by how cold the floor felt under bare feet, by how far the fire had faded. Hours passed unnoticed. Outside, the world continued. Owls called. Rats scurried. Water moved. Somewhere, someone else lay awake too. In towns, the night carried danger. Dark streets, open gutters, watchmen's footsteps echoing, the occasional shout, the distant clang of a gate. Inside homes, people stayed still. Movement meant exposure. So the night became a period of enforced stillness, a pause, not restful in the modern sense, but necessary. Gradually, exhaustion won. Breathing deepened. Bodies sank into bedding. Consciousness loosened its grip. The smells of the body mingled quietly in the darkness. Smoke, sweat, linen, straw. They were not noticed. They were simply there. Toward dawn, the cold was sharpest. The fire long dead. The body stiff. Dreams thin. Then, slowly, light returned. Not as a promise of cleanliness, but as a signal to begin again. Winter did not announce itself with a date. It arrived gradually, almost politely at first. The air sharpened in the mornings. Breath lingered a moment longer. Hands ached slightly when gripping tools. Then, one day, the cold no longer left. It settled, And when it settled, everything changed. The medieval body understood winter before the mind did. Skin tightened, joints stiffened. Old injuries spoke again. The cold moved inward, past clothing, past blankets, until it reached bone. In winter, cleanliness became secondary. Warmth became survival. Water was avoided, not because people forgot how to wash, but because water stole heat. A splash on the face could linger as pain for hours. Wet hair froze the scalp. Damp linen clung to skin like a curse. So washing slowed. Hands still met water. Faces still wiped. But bodies stayed wrapped. Even the smallest act was calculated. A woman heated water carefully, testing it with her fingers before using it. Too cold, and it stayed by the fire. Too hot, and it waited until it cooled. No sudden shocks were allowed. Shock invited sickness. Cold crept into homes through every gap. Stone walls held damp. Earthen floors drew chill upward. Straw insulation dulled, but never stopped it. Firewood disappeared quickly. Each log burned was a decision. Should it warm the room now, or be saved for night? Should it heat water, or cook food? Should it dry clothes, or preserve heat for sleeping bodies? Often, the body lost these arguments. Clothes grew stiff with use. Linen was washed less often. Wool was almost never washed in winter. Instead, garments were aired briefly when the sun appeared, then brought back inside before damp returned. Smell changed in winter. Sweat slowed, but it did not disappear. Bodies still worked. Breath still condensed. Odors deepened instead of spreading. Smoke became heavier, settling into fabric and hair. Homes smelled of cold smoke, old straw, damp wool. It was not unpleasant. It was heavy. Winter nights were long. People went to bed earlier, not from tiredness, but to escape the cold. Lying still conserved heat. Movement wasted it. Families slept closer together. Bodies pressed tight. Children nestled between adults. Blankets layered until movement was difficult. Even animals were brought closer. Chickens sometimes shared indoor space. A goat might be kept near the hearth. Their warmth mattered. So did their smell. The animal scent blended with human scent, creating a thick, living atmosphere. Breath and body heat slowly warmed the room. Condensation formed on walls. Frost traced window edges. Outside, water froze. Wells iced over. Buckets cracked. Rivers slowed beneath skins of ice. Bathing ceased almost entirely. The body accepted its own filth as insulation. Dirt, oil, and fabric trapped warmth. Scrubbing too clean left skin raw and vulnerable. Dry skin cracked in the cold. Knuckles split. Heels bled. Lips chapped until they burned. People rubbed fat into their skin. Animal grease. Butter. Anything that sealed moisture in. These were not luxuries. They were protection. Illness followed winter closely. Colds. Fevers. Coughs that lingered for weeks. The chest ached. Breathing hurt. People blamed drafts. Wet feet. Cold nights. Often they were right. The body weakened in winter. Hunger followed failed harvests. Food was heavier but scarcer. Bread coarser. Vegetables dried or pickled. Freshness rare. Digestion slowed. Bodies conserved energy. In this season, hygiene meant not provoking the body. Do not open the pores. Do not strip unnecessarily. Do not bathe. Do not invite cold inside. Instead, endure. Winter demanded patience. People learned to live within their own layers. Dirt accumulated. Hair grew greasy. Nails darkened. No one remarked on it. Everyone looked the same. The wealthy retreated deeper into stone halls, burning more wood, wrapping themselves in fur. Even there the cold lingered. Fire could not reach every corner. The poor endured with fewer resources, yet both shared the same fear. Cold killed. Quietly, at night, frost formed inside rooms. Breath glittered briefly before fading. Blankets were pulled tight over noses. Sleep came in shallow waves. Dreams were thin and restless. Then, slowly, imperceptibly, winter loosened its grip. The cold softened. Days lengthened. Water flowed again. And when the thaw came, so did washing. But winter left its mark. Bodies carried it forward. Stiffness lingered. Skin remembered cracks. The smell of smoke stayed in hair and cloth. Winter taught restraint. It taught people that the body was not something to cleanse freely, but something to guard carefully against the world. The skin was not just skin, it was a boundary, a thin, living line between the inside of the body and everything outside it. In the medieval world, this boundary was fragile. People believed the skin breathed, that it opened and closed, that it allowed invisible forces to pass through. Heat opened it, cold sealed it, water softened it, wind invaded it. Illness did not begin deep inside the body. It entered through pores, through cracks, through wounds, through carelessness. This belief shaped everything. A cut on the hand was not small. It was an opening. Dirt lodged there was not just dirt. It was danger. A scrape could fester. A blister could rot. A thorn left untreated could poison a limb. People watched their skin closely. At night, by firelight, hands were examined, feet lifted, ankles turned, redness noted, swelling feared. If skin grew hot, illness was near. If skin grew pale, illness lingered. If skin wept, illness had entered. The body spoke through its surface. Rashes bloomed in summer heat. Chafing turned raw. Boils rose without warning. The skin hardened around them, then softened, then broke. Pain was expected. Infection was feared. Without antibiotics, without understanding of bacteria, the skin was both shield and warning sign. A wound that smelled wrong was a bad omen. A wound that darkened was worse. People knew smells. The sweet, sour scent of rot, the sharp tang of pus, the metallic odor of blood gone bad. These were not abstract fears. They were learned through experience. Someone always knew someone who lost a finger, a foot, a life. So skin was protected. Scrubbing too hard was avoided. Scratching too much was restrained. Bathing that softened skin too deeply was feared. Soft skin tore easily. Hard skin endured. Calluses were valued. They were proof of strength, proof of resistance. The hands of labourers were thick, cracked, darkened. They resisted injury better than smooth skin. A noble's soft hand was admired, but also pitied, too tender for the world. People wrapped wounds carefully. Cloth was used, clean linen if possible, old linen if not. Herbs crushed and packed into cuts. Honey spread thickly. Grease applied to seal. Nothing was wasted. Every salve was slow and deliberate. Illness came often. Fever was common. Coughs lingered. Skin flushed or turned ashen. Sweat-soaked bedding. Shivering followed heat. Doctors spoke of humours, of imbalance, of excess heat or cold. But common people watched skin. They felt it. They touched foreheads, pressed palms to cheeks, counted breath. If sweat poured freely, it might be good. If sweat stopped, it was bad. The skin was the map. Plague taught fear deeper than any winter. When it came, it announced itself on the body. Swellings rose in groin and armpit. Skin stretched tight over them, dark and painful. Spots appeared, blackened. The smell followed. People learned to recognize it instantly and to flee. Skin contact became dangerous. Touch avoided. Water avoided. Bathhouses closed. Clothing layered thicker. The skin became something to hide. People believed illness traveled in air, in breath, in scent. Skin absorbed it. Open pores invited it, so they sealed themselves. Clothes worn tight. Skin rarely exposed. Windows closed. Fires burned to purify air. Fear was constant. Even minor illnesses were treated with caution. A rash could be a sign. A sore throat, a warning. A boil watched closely. People isolated themselves when they could. They burned herbs, carried charms, washed hands more often, but still avoided full immersion. Water cleansed, but also weakened. The contradiction was accepted. Mothers warned children not to play in cold streams, not to scratch sores, not to remove scabs too early. Scabs were armor. Under them, healing happened slowly. Time mattered. Healing took patience. The medieval body healed slowly because it had to. It endured. Skin thickened with age. Scars accumulated. Each one told a story. A burn from the hearth, a cut from a blade, a bite from an animal, a blister from work. No body was smooth. Scars were common and unremarkable. Only excessive wounds drew concern. At night, illness was loud. Coughing echoed in small rooms. Fevered bodies tossed. Breath rattled. Sweat soaked straw. Care was constant. Someone stayed awake. Water was offered in sips. Cloths were cooled. Prayers whispered. If the skin cooled too much, blankets were piled on. If it burned, layers were removed. Balance was everything. Too much heat was dangerous. Too much cold was deadly. The skin lived in the middle. As dawn approached, survivors rose. Illness did not end neatly. Some lived with lingering pain, stiffness, damage. Others did not rise. The body was washed after death, carefully, reverently, skin cleaned one final time, wounds covered, hair combed, cleanliness returned at the end. Life, in between, was less certain. The medieval body learned to live with constant risk. The skin bore it silently. There was no final lesson, no moment when life suddenly became clean, safe, or easy. The medieval body did not wait for resolution. It continued, as it always had. Night returned again, as it always did. Fires burned low. Shadows stretched across familiar walls. The air settled into stillness. Bodies lay down, not because they were finished, but because they were tired. The skin carried the marks of the day. Dirt embedded, sweat dried. Cloth stiffened and softened again with warmth. None of it mattered now. Breathing slowed. The room filled with quiet sounds. A soft cough, a blanket shifting, the faint crackle of dying embers. Outside, the world did not pause. Wind moved through bare branches. Water flowed unseen. Animals stirred in darkness. Somewhere, another household settled into sleep, much the same way. Time passed without announcement. Hours folded into one another. The body rested, but never fully surrendered. Even in sleep, it guarded itself. Heat conserved, breath measured, muscles loosened only slightly. Dreams came and went without shape. The medieval body dreamed of what it knew: warmth, cold, work, hunger, relief. There was no thought of cleanliness, no comparison, no longing for another way. This was life as it had always been lived, wrapped, layered, enduring. Morning would come, it always did, and with it the same routines would return. Water touched skin carefully. Cloth absorbed what the body released. Fire warmed and dried and smoked away what it could. Nothing changed, and that constancy was the point. In the quiet repetition, people survived. They adapted. They accepted. They lived. The body did not rebel against its condition. It learned to exist within it, and as night deepened, as breath slowed further, as consciousness loosened its hold, the details faded, smell softened, cold dulled, pain drifted away. Only presence remained. A body at rest, a world turning slowly, time moving without urgency. There is no end here, only continuation, and in that continuation there is calm.